Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we will further iterate on the use of Lumen, but this time we will be working on a fully usable configurator. You will learn how to swap meshes, change materials, turn on and off lights, how to add a UI, and implement smooth camera movements. For those who haven't seen the Lumen course, I will leave a link below. Make sure to check it out. And now, let's get into the video. I opened up my Blender file. For those who followed the Lumen course might recognize this scene. So let's see how we can enhance that scene and make a configuration within it. The first step to create a configuration starts by preparing our 3D assets. We need to make sure that everything that will be configurable should be exported as its own object with the pivot located at the center. This is important because we can change the world position of a given object within the variable manager that we're going to set up inside Unreal Engine. Things can get slightly annoying when our pivot isn't centered correctly. I'm personally going to configure a kitchen, but feel free to configure whatever you prefer. Everything you will learn in this video can be applied to all scenarios. As you can see, I pulled the object that I want to configure to the center of my Blender file. I want to make sure that all the objects within this kitchen are separated. We want to separate everything into groups that we would like to configure, or that could be configurable in the future. This is almost everything. But let's analyze my kitchen. I can have different door types, sinks, taps, kitchen frames, and so on. It's important to do this process beforehand, even for parts of an object that you aren't planning on configuring. If you need to configure them in the future, this way you won't have to make all kinds of changes or edits to the source files. Now that we have separated all configurable options on our kitchen, we can move on to see what options we would like to add. I want to be able to select multiple tabs, stoves, lighting types, and materials. But let's start by focusing on the assets first. All I must do is find assets that I want to use and fit within the current kitchen frame. I'm personally going to add some options from the Dependencies library. I will leave a link in the description if you want to check them out. Back in Blender, I'm going to File, Import, and import the file that I've just downloaded. First, I make sure to check if the dimensions of the mesh fit within my kitchen. If so, I'm going to swiftly check if the UVs and material slots are okay. Do this process for all assets that you want to configure. When done, you should have multiple assets that fit into the given space. Next, let's move on to custom fixtures. We might need to add some extra steps. I found some spotlights on Dependencies that I want to use. My current kitchen frame is set up with a strip light. Simply placing the spotlight on that mesh won't be enough. You can see that there are no cutouts for the spotlights. If I simply turn off my spotlights, you can see that I'm left with a hole. We need to turn off the entire cabinet, but doing that will leave us without a cabinet. What we must do is make a copy of the current cabinet frame and see it as part of one object that we want to change. With two cabinet frames, I can configure what frame should be loaded in, depending on what lighting type I choose. Thinking about this logic is important, no matter what you are configuring, so keep this in mind. A quick tip when working with duplicate meshes. Personally, I keep my spotlights, which in my case are meshes that I have duplicates of, as only one mesh. I do this so I only have one spotlight mesh that I can copy in Unreal Engine as a prefab. This way, when I make changes to that one spotlight, all the prefabs will be updated within my scene. If I don't do this, I have to make identical changes to all the spotlights within my scene. This can be quite tedious. Now that our assets are set up, we have one last thing to cover before we can export, which is materials. We want to be able to change materials within Unreal Engine. All we have to do with our assets is to make sure that wherever we want to have a unique material has its own material slot applied. Let's take the countertop as an example. I want to be able to change the counter separate from the backboard. This way I can make unique combinations. We can achieve this by selecting the faces of the counter first, going over to Materials, create New, and apply new material to selected. Next, I'm going to repeat these steps for the backboard and frame underneath the counter. I can suggest writing down the options you would like to configure, so you have an overview of the preparations that need to be done. With all our meshes collected and prepared, we can export to Unreal Engine. I need to make sure that all meshes, like mentioned before, are set to the center. We could do this manually, but to save some time I'm going to use a free align tool that comes with Blender. We do have to enable this plugin by going over to Edit, Preferences, and here under Plugins, look for the Align tool. Make sure to set it to Enabled. Before we can set all our meshes to the center, I have to make sure that the origin of our objects are set to its mass. We can do this by selecting all our objects, then go to the Object tab here at the top, select Set Origin, and set Origin to Center of Mass. For some objects, it's better to have the origin at the bottom of an object. This really depends on the given object within your scene. I suggest taking a good look at the different object origins needed before exporting. Now that our origin is set, we can start setting our origin to the center. The tool that we just enabled takes data from the first selected object. This means if we have an object 100 meters from the center, all our objects will go to the center of that object 100 meters away. We don't want this. What we can do is set the 3D cursor to the world origin by clicking Shift plus S and select Cursor to World Origin. Now with Shift A, add a cube and make it smaller. Let's make sure that the cube is selected properly, and then select the other objects that we want to set to the center. If you've done this correctly, you can see that the cube is the only object with a yellow outline. With everything selected, I'm going to my side menu. If this isn't opened, in the viewport, click N on the keyboard. Here go to Item and open the Align tool that we've just added. Here, under Align Location, click All. You will see that all your objects are now at the center of your Blender file. Now that all the objects are in the center, we can export them to Unreal Engine. Here on the right, you can see that they gave all my meshes appropriate naming. This is important to keep things clean while working in a team. For exporting, I'm personally going to use Mr. TryPie's batch exporter. If you want to learn more about this, I can highly suggest checking out his guide on how to use the batch exporter. I will leave a link in the description. Now, I'm going to select all the objects that I want to export. I'm going to my batch exporter and make sure it has a folder to save to. Next, I set my mode to objects and limit to selected only. Now click export and we're ready to move on to Unreal Engine. I opened the Unreal Engine 5.2 launcher. Here we need to create a project with the Automotive, Product Design and Manufacturing preset. I personally created a project with the Archviz preset. I will show you how to get the right tools regarding what preset you're using. So, in the launcher, select the Automotive, Product Design and Manufacturing preset, click the Product Configurator, and make sure that Starter Content is set to Enabled. Locate a folder to save the project, give it a name, and click Create. Once the project is opened and all the shaders are compiled, we should be greeted by a guitar configurator. Let's click play and see what happens. We have a complete configurator ready for use. Pretty cool. But let's see how we can use this to create our own configurator out of anything we would like. So for those who don't have a project already, you can continue working within this file. Just make sure to create a new level. If you already had a project just like me, or you choose to create a project with a different template, we need to add the configurator blueprint to the scene of your choice. First open the Unreal scene that you're working in. Now back to the product configuration template that we just created. Then in the content browser, right click the product config folder and migrate this folder into the content browser of your existing project. We can do this by locating our project and selecting the content browser in our Explorer. Now your project should have all the necessary files to create your own configurator. With the configurator files ready, I can import all my kitchen meshes into my scene. I'm going to drag and drop the FBX files that we exported earlier into a created folder here in my content browser. In the FBX import settings, I want to make sure that generate missing collision is set to false. Set generate light map UVs to false. Next, set the material import method to do not create materials. And lastly, set the import textures to false. Now click import all. With all my files imported, I would like to create a blueprint where I put back together the kitchen that we took apart inside Blender. It is not required to make a blueprint. I personally like to do this so I could add code using blueprints if needed. Besides that, having a blueprint with my meshes in it keeps things nice and organized compared to having everything loose in the outliner. So let's create a blueprint by right-clicking in the content browser and select the blueprint class. Pick the actor as the parent class. I'm going to call my blueprint kitchen config. Open the blueprint. When opened, drag and drop all the assets that we've just imported into the Components tab here on the left. You can see that all our objects are now represented as we exported them in Blender. All I'm going to do now is put back together the kitchen by moving around all the individual assets within the blueprint viewport. After moving around, you can see that I have my kitchen back together. If I zoom in on the tabs, you can see that I have overlapping assets. These are the objects that we've added that we want to switch on and off. So for now, this is completely okay. The only thing missing now is the materials. I'm going to add some base materials from Quixel Bridge to our meshes. I'm going to search for my meshes in the content browser and open the mesh details one by one. I want to make sure to apply the materials here. This way, when I make a copy of the mesh, I will have the same base materials applied. With everything set up, let's drag and drop the blueprint within the viewport. With the meshes imported and the blueprint set up, we can start implementing the Variant Manager within our project. The Variant Manager is a specialized UI panel in the Unreal Editor that we can use to set up multiple different configurations of actors within our level. We can add the Variant Manager by right-clicking in our content browser, go to Miscellaneous, and here select the level variant set. If the level variant set isn't visible, make sure to check if the plugin is set to enabled. It should be on by default. Let's give the variant set a name. I'm going to name mine VM, short for Variant Manager, _ kitchen. Let's double click to open our variant set. Here, we are greeted by a window. I will refer to this window as the Variant Manager. So let's go over it step by step. The first thing we need to do is to create different sets we want to be able to change. We can see our sets as the options that we want to configure. For me, these options are daytime, camera position, lighting mode on or off, overall color options, stove, tab, and finally the lighting type. Let's click Create Variant Set and name it to the option you would like to configure. Keep doing this until you have all your options listed. You don't have to do this right away. Options can also be added at any time of development. I created all my options that I've listed earlier. With those set up, we can see that we can add subcategories. These subcategories resemble the number of options we have under a given set. For example, my kitchen has 3 different tabs that I want to switch. So under the variant set tabs that we just created, I'm going to add 3 variations by clicking the add icon 3 times. Give each of them a unique name. I'm going to do the same steps I just did for all my variant sets. When done correctly, it should look something like this. We just created our options, but so far we can't really do anything with these options. This is because there's no data applied to the individual categories yet. So let's see how we can apply some data to our Variant Manager. In the viewport, I'm going to select the kitchen blueprint that we've created earlier. Next, in the outliner, I'm going to drag the selected blueprint into the variant stove and apply it to induction. I set this under induction because I want my induction option to be visible. If you drag and drop it correctly, you should get a pop-up window with options. These options resemble all the properties and values we can change within the object. We need to think with some logic here. I want my induction stove to be visible, But if my induction stove is visible, I need to hide my gas stove, because both can't be visible at the same time. Therefore, I'm going to search for visibility of these two objects. I can simply do this by typing visible here in the search bar. Because I have all my meshes in one blueprint, I can see all my options in this one list. Let's select the gas stove and induction stove. If we now select our induction stove here under the stove variant set, we can see that our kitchen asset has been added under the category actors. When selected, under properties, you will see the visibility properties that we've just added. When set to enabled, the selected object will be visible. When disabled, the selected object won't be visible. Because this is my induction option, I'm going to set the induction to enabled and the gas stove to disabled. Now do the exact same thing for the gas stove, but this time swap the visibility of the two objects. A quick tip is that you could also copy a subcategory and make the changes more quickly. If you are a beginner, however, I recommend doing these steps manually again. This way you will get more familiar with all the actions of the tools that are available to us. Now that we know how to set that up, I'm going to repeat these steps for the remaining assets. I repeated all the steps as shown before. I have only done these steps for the meshes that I can change. These are my stoves, tabs, and lighting types. All of them have a visibility property applied. What I can do now is double click a set that we've created, and it will change all the values to what we have set our input to. By clicking through all the options that I have set, you can see that things can change now within my viewport. The next steps are swapping materials, change the actual lighting values, and set up camera positions. But let's start by jumping into the materials. Previously, I made a variant set named color. In here, I have created some options already. These are just names of color presets that I want to load in. If I click any of these options, you can see nothing happens as I haven't set any data in those options yet. To add material data, we must do the exact same as before, but this time, instead of adding a visibility property, we are going to add the material slots that are applied on our meshes, and change the values in the property list. Let me show you how. So again, drag and drop the blueprint or mesh that you want to edit on an option in the variant manager, and start the search by typing the mesh name, which for me is kitchen counter. This will filter out all the meshes that we don't want to change anything of. Now click spacebar and type material behind it. This should show you all the available material slots on the given object. It's not necessary to add all the material slots, so we need to figure out what material slots we need to add. I only want to change the backboard and the counter, not the entire frame. What you can do is open the mesh details and look at the material slots. If you aren't sure what material corresponds to which part of the mesh, just add a random material to see what changes. When figured out, check the material element number. These numbers will be in the property list and correspond with each material. Back in the property list, I'm going to select the material elements that represent my countertop and backboard. If I now select my option, I can find the two materials that I've added here under my property list. These 6 options resemble 6 different color options that I can change my kitchen counter to. If you want any other part of your object to have a different color without changing the other set colors, then you need to make another variant set that only changes that part of a mesh. So keep this in mind. I'm going to repeat these steps to my other remaining 5 material slots. In my case, that's just copying the first option and renaming it to the material I'm going to change it to. After copying 5 extra material slots, you can see I now have 6 different options. I also decided to add cabinet doors and frames. I did this because for the first 3 options I want to have a white kitchen, and for the last 3 options I want to have a black kitchen. With that set up, we can add the materials to our properties. I already have all the materials in my scene that I want to use. I simply imported the materials from the Quixel library. All I must do is select the color option that I want to change in my variant manager, and drag and drop the new material into the right slot. After doing this, you can see that I can change my materials by double clicking on the variant manager set. The final thing we need to add before we can add our camera is the ability to change the lighting intensity. Everything you learned so far comes together. We need to change the visibility of the lamps that we're going to add and set an emissive material depending if the lamp is set to on or off. The first thing we need to do is to add some lamps within our scene. I added mine within my blueprint. As you can see, I added some simple spotlights to cast lighting from my spotlight meshes, and I added one rectangle light to act as my strip light. With the lamps added, I'm going back to the variant manager, where I need to set the visibility of all the lamps that we've added, and all the corresponding assets. So for me, those are the two frames that we created earlier, all the separate spotlight meshes, and all the lamps that we've added in our blueprint. I'm going to set all the meshes and lamps that belong to my spotlights to be true, and everything that belongs to my strip lights to false. I'm going to do the exact opposite for the strip lighting. Now when I swap between the two, you can see that I can select my spotlight and rectangle light separately from each other. We can take it up a notch by turning the lamps on and off. To sell photorealism, we can also add properties that switch the materials on our spot and trim lights. Let's take the spotlight as an example. Right now, you can see that my spotlight has a simple metal interior. When the light is on, you would expect some emission from the light source. What we are going to do is set the material to emissive when the lights are on, and switch the material to a non-emissive when the lights are off. If you don't use the on and off function that I'm about to show, then your light source should already have the right material applied, emissive when on and non-emissive when off. Here in my variant manager, under the lighting tab, I'm going to add the material properties of my lighting meshes and the intensity values of the spot and rectangle lights. All I must do is set the right material slot of the light bulb to an emissive material, and make sure that the lamps have an intensity factor greater than 0. I want to set this to a number where the lighting looks realistic within my viewport. Now do the same for the off variant, but this time set all the light intensities to 0 and the materials to a non-emissive material. Now, when we switch between the two, you can see that my lights react appropriately. You can apply the same setup to create a day and night scenario. All you do is turn the environmental light off when night is selected. Now that we are done setting up our variant manager, you should have learned how to set up lighting, different materials, and how to switch objects using the variant manager. It's pretty cool to switch objects within our viewport, but it isn't exactly a configurator yet. For that, we need to add a camera and assign the code that we have imported in the beginning. Let's start by adding a camera. We can add a camera by going to the Quickly Add to Project drop-down menu. Go to Cinematic and select the Cinematic Camera Actor. For now, I'm going to set my camera somewhere in front of my kitchen. I want my camera to be able to track the interchangeable meshes within my variant manager. It would also be cool that while we could track those objects, we could also automatically change the depth of field depending on the angle and the zoom of the camera. For this to work, we must import an empty actor too. We can add an empty actor by going to the Quickly Add to Project drop-down menu. This time go to All Classes and select the actor from here. Here in my outliner, I'm going to name the empty actor as Camera Tracker. Now selecting the cinematic camera that we've just imported, I'm going to enable the camera look at tracking and set the actor to track the empty actor that we called Camera Tracker. Scrolling down under the focus settings, I'm going to set the method to tracking and set the actor to track to our empty actor again. In my viewport, I'm going to set the empty actor in the general area of where my tab is located. If I now select my camera, we can see it's focused on that area. If we want multiple camera positions within our configurator, we must make use of the variant manager once more. Earlier, I created a camera variant set. All we must add here is the camera and empty actor's relative position. We can do this by dragging the camera and empty actor into an option here under the camera variant set. In the properties menu, search for relative. Now add the relative location and rotation. We could either update the numbers here in our property list, or simply have the camera at the desired position and then add the camera to our properties. It will automatically pick the current location and rotation that the camera is set to in the viewport. When one position is done, you can move the camera in the viewport to its next position. You won't lose the camera's previous position. We just double click on the option we created and the camera and tracker will be back in that position. Now do this for all the desired positions you want to be able to focus on. After that is done, you should be able to view all options by swapping between the different variant sets. For some camera options that we create, it can be necessary that the given object changes with the camera. For me, this is my lighting. You can see when I switch between my spotlight and strip light camera that one of the other won't be visible. What we can do here is make use of the dependency structure that comes with the variant manager. When adding a dependency, we can choose anything that we created in our variant manager. We want the strip light to be visible when the strip light camera is selected. So in the strip light camera, add a dependency and set the variant set on that what you want to have control over. For me, this is the variant set lighting type. Next, under variant, I'm going to select my strip light. Now we need to make sure to do the same thing for the spotlight, otherwise it won't switch back. When I select one of the camera options, you can see now that the lighting option switches correctly. Now that we have set up our variant manager in its entirety, we can see that we can switch all the options perfectly. But when we hit play here in our viewport, you can see that the variant manager doesn't translate to a usable configurator. To do this, we must add the variant manager to our viewport first. Now we need to add the configuration code. If you don't have this, I recommend checking out the timestamp under the video called Importing Configuration Data. So let's open the product config folder, then navigate to blueprints and drag and drop the blueprint configurator into the viewport. With the blueprint configurator selected in the outliner, moving over to the details panel under default, add the created variant manager as the LVS actor. Make sure to set the camera that we created as the camera actor. You can see we can only add one camera as our main actor, and this is why it's necessary to only create one camera and change its position rather than creating multiple cameras. With that set up, now let's click play again. Look at that, we have a workable configurator. It's amazing how easy we can set it up using Epic's provided code. But while in play mode, you can see that our options aren't displayed nicely. What we need to do for this is head over to the variant manager and right click on the set. Here you see a thumbnail option. You can either set one from view or add one from a file. I'm personally going to import some files. With the files added, you can see my variant manager displaying the right thumbnails. Now when I hit play, you can see that it translates perfectly to our configurator. While on my configurator, you can see that I can move my camera. You can move the camera by holding down Alt and the left mouse button. To zoom, hold down Alt and the right mouse button, and press G to hide and unhide the UI. We reached the end of this course. I'm very pleased with how fast we can iterate on design choices using the variant manager and free configuration template. I highly recommend pushing the boundaries of the variant manager. We just discovered the basics, but there's much more we can achieve. I hope you got a grasp and understanding of how the variant manager can be used, and I can't wait to see what you create. I'm always happy to check out people's work, so definitely show me. You can send me a link on my Instagram. I will leave a link in the descriptions below. Lastly, I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel. And a special thanks to Martin Javain, Aaron Miko, Henrique Xavier Geraldis, and Lorabel Lopanza for being a channel member. You guys are awesome. Have a great day everyone, and hope to see you in the next video.